Later this month, heads of state will gather in New York City for the United Nations General Assembly. President Trump will address the body. Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu might. This year's General Assembly comes at a precarious time in world events. President Trump is back in office. Russia is still making war on Ukraine, and Israel is still fighting to retrieve hostages taken by Hamas terrorists. It also comes at a time when the U.S. is challenging the effectiveness of certain UN-sponsored organizations, especially ones supposedly dedicated to world health and, of course, Palestinians. The Trump administration has intensely cut back U.S. funding of many of these groups and has even began targeting individuals within the UN's umbrella it says are working against American interests, namely Francesca Albanese, the UN's lead on Palestinian issues, who's often accused of bias and even spreading outright falsehoods. She is now under U.S. sanctions.
Clearly, the U.S. is taking a strong stand, I would say tougher than ever before.
Hillel Neuer is the executive director of UN Watch. Our conversation took place mere moments after news broke Tuesday of Israel's strike on Hamas leaders residing in the Qatari capital of Doha.
The U.S., for the first time in history, has sanctioned a purported UN official. I say purported because Francesca Albanese has the title of the UN rapporteur on Palestine, but in fact, her supposed renewal that was meant to take place in April was never lawfully carried out. UN Watch has shown in our reports how the basic procedure of the United Nations Human Rights Council was flagrantly violated. The United States made objections. The Netherlands publicly announced their objection. Hungary and Argentina sent in letters. We submitted a 56-page dossier. All of that was legally required to be addressed by the Council, right, and they never did so. So the only way a renewal can take place is if there are no objections, and there were, and the Council ignored those objections. So in fact, her renewal never took place lawfully. She has no immunity. That's why there was nothing stopping Secretary Rubio from sanctioning this Hamas supporter. She is de facto a spokesperson for Hamas. And that's why yesterday in U.S. federal court in Colorado, a Christian Friends of Israel filed a lawsuit against her for defamation and libel for the things that she said about them because they dare to support Israel. So bravo to Secretary Rubio for banning that Hamas supporter from entering America. And look, let's be honest, what's going to happen in New York in the week of September 22nd, it's primarily a catwalk for dictators. And those are the words of world chess champion Garry Kasparov, former world chess champion, Russian dissident. So the UN General Assembly is a catwalk for dictators. And he's right. We're going to see on the catwalk the Erdogan of Turkey is a dictator. We're going to see Qatar, dictatorship. The president of Iran, dictatorship. The former terrorist from Syria. I mean, the list goes on and on. And they love the UN. They love the UN. They see it as a counterbalance to America. They see it as a way of tying up Gulliver and using the language and images of international law and credibility when in fact they're a club of dictatorships.
At the top of this club is a person who has the title of Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. Most Americans don't pay too much attention, I think, to the inner workings of the UN or even some of the outer workings of the UN, certainly not its bureaucracy or its governance. But this is a person who has, I think, decidedly has taken sides in the Israel-Hamas conflict. He has. I still don't think to this day he ever actually condemned the October 7th attacks. I could be wrong about that.
No, I think he did, but then he quickly added, this was like 2 weeks after the mass rape massacre of families. Guterres did condemn the attacks, but then he said, however, nothing happens in a vacuum. These attacks did not happen in a vacuum, he said. These attacks did not happen in a vacuum. And then he went on to enumerate numerous alleged grievances by the Palestinians over decades against Israel. In effect, he justified the attacks, one grievance after another, saying, well, things didn't happen in a vacuum, as if terrorism can ever be justified. And we're supposed to believe, rightfully, that terrorism can never be justified, no matter what you think what injustice you perceive. You can't slaughter innocents. But Guterres was quick to say, I condemn the attacks, but they didn't happen in a vacuum. When he could have said, and of course he's partly right in the fact that nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing we do in our lives happen in a vacuum. But had he been more to the point, he would have said, nothing happens in a vacuum. Where did these terrorists come from? What schools did they go to? Well, they went to UN schools. 90% of Gazans, according to the UNRWA, the infamous UN Agency for Palestinians, their legal advisor, Johan Soufi, said on French TV last year that 90% of Gazans are graduates of UNRWA. Well, that means roughly 90% of the terrorists who massacred families and committed horrific acts were UNRWA alumni. That's Mr. Guterres. He's been in office for many years. So he should take responsibility. It's not by accident that they invaded Israel, because they were taught from a young age, your home is not in Gaza, your home is in Tel Aviv, and it belongs to you, and you should dismantle it violently. And that's what they did.
This has been, I think, again, another year in which things have changed dramatically for the UN. And a lot of that comes from the fact that the U.S. is, especially with the Trump administration coming back to power, or a new Trump administration in power, that they've kind of squished those purse strings yet again, like they did the first time. That begins to affect what the UN can and can't do, because they need money. And I think everyone knows the biggest funder of the UN has been the U.S., specifically the U.S. taxpayer. So they want to still continue these missions, but they have to face the fact that they are potentially running out of money, or certainly don't have the cash flow they used to have. And the fact that at least one person could be put under sanctions, in this case Albanese, they must realize that the Trump administration could do this further.
Yes, that's right. Look, the U.S. cuts in donations to the UN are very substantial. Already, I'm based in Geneva, Switzerland, where there's maybe 25,000 UN and related staff from all kinds of UN-affiliated agencies like the International Labour Organization, World Health Organization, the Office of the UN Human Rights Commissioner. Many of these agencies are facing substantial cuts, and hundreds of jobs have been cut. And so it's real. It's real. And, decades ago, about some 25 years ago, John Bolton had said, if UN headquarters were leveled today, it wouldn't make a world of difference. And so the question is, when hundreds of these jobs are cut, what difference is it making on things that really count? And look, it's the UN has the potential to do good. There are hungry people in the world. We do need agencies to feed them when there are emergencies. But tragically, much of the UN has been hijacked by radical politics. And again, Gaza is a classic case, not the only one, but it's a classic case, because there, you could have real aid agencies actually helping people and giving food and settling refugees. Instead, Guterres gave the order, only UNRWA can deal with it. And UNRWA is not a neutral agency whose mission is to give out food. Their mission is to tell Palestinians that you suffered an injustice and they have the right to return and dismantle Israel. If it were not the case, then there's a dozen other UN agencies that could be giving out the food. UNHCR, UNDP, World Health Organization, those are the agencies that do so all around the world. So the reality is that much of the UN is hijacked by radical politics. Again, I appeared just this morning before the United Nations Human Rights Council. Human Rights Council, let's put that in scare quotes, because the members include Cuba, a police state that arrests teenagers for demanding democracy; Qatar, that has a million enslaved laborers; China, regular member of the Human Rights Council, has 1 million Muslims in camps; locks up anyone who dares to protest within moments. And, Vietnam, which is a dictatorship that supports torture, is a member. China, Cuba, Qatar, Vietnam, these are the regular members of the Human Rights Council. More than half are full-on dictatorships. That's the reality. And I think it's high time that the U.S. and other democracies ought to speak out and say no more.
Our guest is Hillel Neuer of UN Watch. We're discussing the upcoming United Nations General Assembly later this month on the Fox News Rundown Evening Edition. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. We'll have more straight ahead. You mentioned you've been talking here a lot about UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency for Palestine. Earlier today, just really shortly before we began our conversation, explosions were heard in Doha, Qatar. And the Israelis are now taking responsibility for that, saying they targeted those top chief Hamas Politburo members that have been living really in opulence in Doha, commanding the Hamas forces in Gaza from a very, very safe distance where, they themselves are not getting any blood on them. They might have been taken out by this strike. We'll know more later. But you posted a photograph to your Twitter account, to your X account, that's very pertinent here. Can you tell me about that photo?
Sure. Several days ago, Iranian media and Hamas media published a photo of a beautiful, opulent room in Doha, Qatar, where there was a meeting between Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. So this is the foreign minister of the Islamic regime in Iran, which is responsible for terrorism and assassinations across the free world. In New York City, just a few months ago, I was in federal court to witness the trial of three criminal assassins who tried to kill my friend, Masih Alinejad. She's an Iranian-born journalist, a hero who speaks out against the abuses against women in Iran and has millions of followers. She's the most courageous person that I know. And she now lives in Brooklyn. And Iran hired criminal gang, some Central Asian gang. That Iran is very clever. They don't necessarily send Iranian assassins.
Right.
They'll hire criminal gangs in local countries. So they send criminals to assassinate her in Brooklyn. And a guy with a submachine gun was caught, an AK-47, outside her home in Brooklyn, ready to assassinate her. And this was about a year or so after they tried to kidnap her, take her to Venezuela and then to Iran. So the Iranian regime, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, is sitting there in Qatar with his Iranian delegation, and opposite him is the Hamas delegation. These are the Hamas leaders that are still alive as of a few days ago. And one of the senior Hamas leaders, is a gentleman named Su'ail al-Hindi. And Su'ail al-Hindi is known to me because I've been monitoring his actions as a long time, 3 decades long, UNRWA school teacher. I'm going to say that again. A school teacher paid by the UN with our money. U.S. taxpayers were giving some $300 million a year to UNRWA to employ Su'ail al-Hindi as a school teacher, as a principal. Eventually he was a school principal, and eventually was head of the entire staff union in Gaza, 13,000 employees. And he is also a Hamas terror chief. So you say it and you don't believe it. UNRWA school teacher, principal, head of the UNRWA staff union, again, an agency that we've been paying for up until about 2 years ago, was a Hamas terror chief and is one of the people, part of the Hamas delegation last week. And time will tell whether he was part of the Hamas group that, according to reports, were assassinated in a bomb blast in Qatar today.
What does an organization like yours do during the UN General Assembly? Are you running around, pounding on doors, knocking on, trying to get attention to certain people? I mean, I imagine this is like a big deal for an agency such as yours.
Yes, it is a big deal. The truth is that because we are not a member state, right, we have status at the UN. We obtained, decades ago, thanks to U.S. help at the time in 2002. We have status as an observer at the UN, or what's called an NGO, a non-governmental organization, and as such, we can enter UN premises and meet with delegations and so forth, but not during that week. So actually, that week, it's sort of all bets are off, right, and they only let country delegations attend the UN meeting. So I don't have access to the UN during that time. I do hope to be in New York for part of the week. I do hope to be, there as a commentator to help to explain to the world what's going on, and when whether it's dictatorships who gather to try to attack America and Israel, or the democracies. Let's not forget we have something unprecedented, is that major democracies, European countries, France, the UK, also my native Canada, I'm ashamed to say, and Australia, have announced that they intend to recognize a Palestinian state, and that they intend to do so as part of a summit that will take place on Monday, September 22nd. And that'll be a day before President Trump addresses the opening of the UN on the 23rd, but the day before Macron with Saudi Arabia, but really led by Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, have been pushing to declare a state, even as they acknowledge that there is no state. Okay, the Ramallah has a Palestinian Authority local government that basically governs several cities. They take out the garbage and do a few more things. These are governments that continue to support terrorism. The PA, as we know in America, has a pay-to-slay program. Those who commit terrorism, just like yesterday, Palestinian terrorists gunned down a rabbi and other innocent civilians at a bus stop in Jerusalem. Those families will get money for the rest of their lives. You get rewarded if you kill Jews. That's the Palestinian Authority. And then much of so-called Palestine is run by Hamas. Gaza, up until, recently, it was entirely run by Hamas. Now Israel controls part of the territory. So there is no democratic Palestine. Abbas is in the 20 or 21st year of his 4-year term, hasn't had elections in over 15 years.
Hillel Neuer, you are with UN Watch. Thank you so much for being with us on the Fox News Rundown Evening Edition.
Thank you for having me.